Are you a parent navigating the complexities of co-parenting, family court, or even domestic violence? If you are looking for ways to help protect your children and build a strong and supportive community around you, then look no further. Gray Minds Think Alike is your go-to resource for everything related to the complexities of family life. Join us as we dive into thoughtful conversations with experts and explore practical tips and strategies for tackling the challenges of parenthood in the throes of adversity so that no parent feels alone and every child's safety is protected. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Gray Minds Think Alike. Today, we are talking with Donna King, the president and director of Victims Safe Harbor Foundation, a nonprofit that provides direct legal services, education, and research services regarding domestic violence, intimate partner violence, coercive control, and child abuse. Donna is an activist, a survivor, lawyer, and an author, and we're so glad to have her on today. Hi, Donna. It's so nice to speak with you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Allie. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, of course. Just to give some context, I met Donna, I guess, a year ago, right before our Greyson's Choice event. And we had a nice conversation, and then we met at the event, and I did get a copy of your book, which we were going to talk about, called Voices of Intimate Partner Homicide, an exploration of coercive control and lethality. So I guess if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you got started.
Sure. Something that's different about me, or I guess my path to becoming an attorney, especially, I actually had no intention ever of becoming an attorney. I think that's the case for a lot of survivors who end up doing similar things, like you and I were actually products of our circumstances where we are going about living our lives and we end up in situations that we didn't expect to have happen. I think a lot of people think that survivors of intimate partner violence think that they are or know that they're getting into an abusive relationship. That's not necessarily the case. And in my situation, I started off with a really good first marriage. And it definitely didn't end up that way. And the divorce was very difficult. I didn't realize that the nonviolent tactics of coercive control when I was in it. And certainly didn't realize what the divorce was going to entail. And the litigation ultimately went on for 21 years.
21 years of litigation?
Yes.
How long was your actual marriage?
So I left a little bit shy of 8 years.
So for 8 years you were married and you were experiencing coercive control, but I'm sure at the time you had no idea what that was. And you
Correct.
just thought this was a horrible marriage.
That it was really, actually, I was going to say it was really great, but now that I know what I know, there were red flags even before I got married. And hindsight being 2020, that's a lot of what drives me now. Because I know a lot of people don't understand the nonviolent tactics of coercive control. And I was very young. I was 21 when I got married. And my family, we weren't educated. And back then, there really wasn't the awareness that there is now. And we all know that there needs to be a lot more awareness than there is. And that's a lot of what drives me. And it's what drove my family to really support me to get me to where I am now, because they became so involved in everything that happened. Because I know for a fact, had it not been for my family and the support system that I had, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to raise my daughters. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do all the different things. I have no idea where I would be, to be honest. And actually, the day I left, a marriage counselor had told me that I was so verbally and mentally abused. He wanted to know what kind of support system I had that was keeping me off drugs and out of a mental institution.
And that's the same thing.
And honestly, I had no idea what he was talking about when he said that. And it really wasn't until I went to law school and ended up learning about coercive control and reading Evan Stark's book about how men entrap women that I really started to understand what that marriage counselor was talking about. And that was a whole new world to me. And I started being able to piece those puzzle pieces together and really analyze not only what had happened prior to my leaving, but then what was taking place in the court system as far as the depths of the nonviolent tactics of coercive control that were happening in the court system. Because we all think if you're being abused when you're in the relationship, then all you need to do is leave, get away from the abuser, and that's going to fix everything. And as so many people who go through this understand, a lot of times the separation is the beginning of just the next phase of what it is you're going to go through.
Especially for children.
Exactly. Although I will say there's quite a few people that we have helped who go through it, whether or not they have children or not. And it really depends on how motivated the abuser is to maintain that power and control over their victim. And where there's a will, there is a way. The judicial system is the perfect forum to maintain that power and control. You can isolate, you can intimidate, you can harass through a judicial proceeding. Sure. And yes, children are one way to do that, but you don't necessarily need children to do it through a judicial proceeding. That was one thing I very quickly learned. So I was legally divorced about 2.5 years into it. And then the post-separation litigation lasted
and
quite a long time.
What was that about?
It was multiple issues. Some of it had to do with child custody. Some of it had to do with financial fraud that I learned about afterwards. And then when I tried to get out of that, it was hard to get out of that. And it just compounded itself.
Went on while you were in law school, correct?
Went to law school to try to figure out how to make it stop.
And what type of law do you practice or did you practice?
We have a nonprofit organization to assist victims of domestic violence and child abuse. Okay. So family law. Okay. A lot of people come to us, they ask for assistance with personal injury or civil rights cases and that type of thing. But we
Okay, so it's family law.
Right. Our focus is family law. That's what we know.
Okay. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about Victim Safe Harbor?
Sure. So we're a nonprofit organization. We do social impact work. We focus on victims of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, which lends itself to child abuse victims. And we do work throughout the state of Florida. We also get a lot of calls around the country. We do have some clients in other states. Some of that can be through working with other attorneys, either on a consulting basis or through entering a notice of appearance through a pro hoc vice in other states. But mostly we do that type of work through consulting. Okay. We also, even in the state of Florida, if clients will call and they would like us on a case, but they maybe have an attorney where they feel like what they're going through in terms of the domestic violence, or even feeling like their attorney doesn't understand the nuances of coercive control, or really they're just not getting responsiveness out of their attorney. They feel frustrated. Okay. We may get some calls and say, I'm not sure if I'm happy with my attorney and I'd like to talk to you to see where maybe you can fit in and help us. Then we may talk to them and we can say, we can come in and help augment your case and work with your attorney if you're not looking to change attorneys. And a lot of times attorneys are grateful for that.
They're not losing a client.
And I think a lot of times attorneys who are more litigators, as opposed where they like to go into court and they're the ones who are the trial attorneys, they're not necessarily the attorneys who have the bedside manner to deal with clients on a day-to-day basis. So they don't answer the regular questions that maybe the clients who are dealing with abusers on a regular daily basis need I don't want to say high maintenance cases, but at the end of the day,
high conflict.
They're high conflict, which then makes them high maintenance cases.
Right. Yes.
And sometimes I think that there are attorneys who don't necessarily understand that because they haven't lived that. Or if they do understand that, their practices aren't necessarily built around that model because they're for profit. And they need to make their overhead. They need to make sure that they're paying their bills. They have a certain number of cases and they need to pay attention to a certain number of things. We've set ourselves up to where we don't take on too many cases so that we can be sure that we're paying attention to the clients and their needs and trying to answer their questions. And yeah, we're probably not making that high profit, but that's why we're set up to be nonprofit, if that makes sense.
So it's a nonprofit law firm.
Correct. That's exactly what we are. And then we have other things that we do in the sense that I have provided continuing education services. I love to do research. I have acted as an expert witness. So there's other things that we can provide through Victim Safe Harbor that other traditional for-profit law firms don't necessarily do, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense.
And just one other thing, if we do have the opportunity, I would love to work on policy more. Okay. I really think that it's very important to try to get coercive control into more definitions for domestic violence, not only in Florida, but throughout the country. So I know that's one thing that you had really hoped to accomplish here in Florida. And it is one reason why my research when I was in law school and in my PhD program focused on not just like in law school, it was more about the advocacy and doing the policy driven work. But then when I got into my PhD program and could do the empirical based research in my book for my dissertation and then ultimately for the book as well, to try to get to the point where we can prove that there is a link between the nonviolent tactics of coercive control and lethality, to try to really move these legislators to understand that we don't have to have just the physical violence component to afford protections for intimate partner violence or domestic violence, but we also need to look at the nonviolent tactics of coercive control in and of themselves, aside from physical violence, in order to provide protection, because there is that link there.
I think that's what we were trying to do with Greyson's law, and at least getting that step so that at least judges would look at things like text messages and threats and things of that nature, which is what I experienced firsthand. So we are making steps, and I just had Senator Berman on my podcast, and I was speaking yesterday with Danielle Pollock, who is a policymaker that was responsible for Caden's law. So there are definitely some talks about possibly getting mandatory training for judges, and that would be federally funded.
That would be fantastic. And I know that there is so much more awareness. There was an article in Forbes yesterday about coercive control, and the more noise that can be made, the more policies that are implemented. The only thing I think that is unfortunate with the fact that you weren't able to get more language in the definition of domestic violence with the coercive control language going in there, for instance, in Florida, what seems to be taking place in the court system is some judges are utilizing that as a reason not to issue some injunctions because it seems to be more discretionary right now, where some judges, they see those nonviolent tactics and they say, yes, I can issue an injunction even if there isn't physical violence. But then other judges say there's no evidence of physical violence here. There's no threat of physical violence. So even if there are plenty of other nonviolent tactics that are present, even if there isn't that physical violence component or threat thereof, then they say can't issue the injunction. So it's so discretionary still, where perhaps if that definition clinician has more teeth to it. They would feel they had the tools to.
I also think that, like you said, there are red flags, and it's also part of the lawyer's job to create that pattern to show the judge these red flags. Because in our statute, in our law, we do have protection over stalking. It's in the law. It's not acceptable, and some other non-physical tactics. It's just not spelled out as coercive control. So it's up to the lawyer to really spell that out.
Right. Yep. You're correct.
So that's why good lawyers are hard to come by. So someone that is going through something where they need a law consultation or just information on research about coercive control or intimate partner violence, they would reach out to Victim Safe Harbor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do you work with any like agencies or companies aside from individual people?
We have some informal partnerships with different shelters. They send us referrals if they think that the people that they're dealing with fit the type of services that we provide. A lot of times, if there are cases that are really involved and the cases have been going on for a long time, the term I trademarked is judicial terrorism. Okay. And that's for the cases that have been going on quite a long time. What I described to you as far as what I've been through and offshoot cases, not every case necessarily is, let's just say, a case for judicial terrorism. But of course, everybody's experience is very different and unique. So somebody could be in a case that's been going on for just a year or two, and it could be very intense and very extreme, and that could certainly fit that model. Or it could be something where it's been going on for 10 or 15 years, and that definitely could most likely, from personally going through that and then getting the formal training, it's impossible to not learn different things along the way as far as procedural tactics to use, procedural means to try to work through how to best deal with the situation. So a lot of times we have referrals for those types of cases. Unfortunately, when cases get to that point, the potential client is already out of funds. They've gone through so many different attorneys. It's difficult for us to try to figure out at that point in time how to help them. We're not grant funded, and that makes it difficult for us to try to figure out how to work with them. One thing we do is for lesser fees, if their resources have been so depleted, we will work with them as pro se litigants, because in Florida, we're able to do that. So sometimes that's an option for them.
Oh, absolutely.
And when I say we're not grant funded, I would like to acknowledge we have received some private grants, and that's allowed us to help some very needy and worthwhile, not that they're not all worthwhile, but some clients who we've been able to help with the private client grants. We just haven't received public grants.
Gotcha. Okay. That's all good to know. And I hope all of our listeners out there can get some useful information. I know I get asked questions all the time about legal help, so I will definitely direct them in your direction.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about your book?
Sure. So I do have it here.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is the paperback, much more cost-effective version.
Sure.
There is a hardback. It's published by Routledge, so they're an academic publisher. And it definitely started from an academic perspective. So it may look a little bit daunting when you first see it. It's heavily cited, but I wrote it to hopefully be accessible to all sorts of different types of people who are interested in it, from lawyers to psychologists to law enforcement, and people going through this as well. And so my original goal was to find out if indeed there was a link between lethality and the nonviolent tactics of coercive control. Before I did my PhD research study, I had no idea what the data would bear out. Sure. And ultimately, the data did show that there is a link between the nonviolent tactics of coercive control and lethality.
How did you get your data?
So I started from the homicide data from Florida.
Okay.
And worked my way backwards. So I started with the outcome. And then, so I knew that all of the victim data between heterosexual spouses were, that was the outcome then. So it was all anonymous, and I had to make sure that all of that data was good. So ultimately I ended up with 493 heterosexual intimate partner homicide. But I only had case numbers. And then with that, I had to figure out, okay, who are these people? So I got the homicide reports and determined. So let me back up. So there was about 650 cases during the time frame. It was a 9.5-year time frame that I did.
Okay.
But some of those, let's say the couple might have been in a car ride. Well, and were killed. That was misidentified. So I whittled it down to 493 that qualified.
Okay.
So
when you say qualify, it means actually killed by the partner.
One spouse or the other. Correct. Okay. So they weren't in a robbery. They weren't in a car wreck. Right. One was killed by the other. So they qualified for the study. Then I went to whatever law enforcement agency in Florida where they were. So if they were in Seminole County where the homicide took place, then I went and got that homicide report. And that's how I identified who the people were. And then from there, I figured out what police reports were connected to those people and whether or not they had an injunction for protection connected to them. So that's how I was able to determine whether or not there was any prior reportings of physical violence between the couple prior to the homicide, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So some of them may have had domestic disturbances, but those domestic disturbances might have been, we were just having a heated argument. But no reporting of physical violence between them. If there was an injunction for protection that was filed, then the question becomes what was reported in the injunction for protection. I had data set A that was a quantitative data set, and that was the 493 cases. Okay. And then I had data set B. There were 6 of the 493 cases. There were 66 that had injunctions for protection that were filed. So to me, that number was very small out of 493 homicides. I thought that spoke a lot to the fact that these couples who ultimately ended up with a homicide between them, they didn't. And what I was looking at was the mobilization of the law. That was the theory that I was using. People didn't mobilize the law. However, when I considered the fact that the time frame that I was looking at was 2006 to 2016. That was before in Florida, our injunction for protection program, where we now have shelters that provide for free attorneys to help victims file their injunctions for protection. Right. So if this study was to be repeated again now, I would like to think that those numbers, as far as people who have filed, yes, that at least the numbers filed would have gone up. Or let's hope that that comparison to however many people might have been killed would go down, something to that effect. So, and this is kind of a unique period of time, but of the 493 intimate partner homicide cases, that's data set A, only 15.3 of them had a prior report of physical violence to law enforcement before the homicide.
So what were the other 85%?
Those would have been cases that did not have any prior reporting, at least as far as what would have been documented to law enforcement. So that's to law enforcement. Only 13.4% had a record of a filed petition for injunction.
Okay, so do you think those people that had that, do you have any idea what led to their ultimate demise?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. What do you mean?
For the people that didn't file anything and there was no record or no evidence that you could find, do you have any idea why they were killed?
I have the homicide.
Or what was going on? or what was going on in their relationship?
So I had the homicide reports, but if they didn't, other than if they had domestic disturbance reports where they didn't report any prior physical violence, then I would have had those, but that would not have been counted in that particular percentage because I was only looking at physical violence. Some of the homicides, there wasn't any report. It was just like there was a homicide. In data set B, where they filed an injunction, they might have had police reports and injunctions.
Right.
So the statistics that I'm giving you came from the dissertation, but then, and that wasn't as full a picture as the book. So the book fully develops the 66, or I'm sorry, I keep saying 66. It's actually 62 cases that were the cases where they filed injunctions. So the good thing about the cases where they filed injunctions, they start telling a story because those victims wrote narratives about what was happening to them. And from there, I did a qualitative analysis on the language that was in the narratives. And that's where I was really able to analyze the coercive control aspects of the narratives. And even though you would think that the injunction for protection, they would definitely say that there was physical violence going on because we know that you really need to meet that standard to get the protection. Some of them really didn't meet that standard. Of those cases, 61.8% had a prior report of physical violence to law enforcement. 69.4% had a prior report of physical violence to the court. So that means about 30% of the injunctions did not have physical violence reported in them. Basically, nonviolent tactics of coercive control.
I'm just curious, do you know if the statistics, if it's men versus women, or is it not? Do you not know the sex?
I did run that. Let me see if I can find that. I don't have it right off.
But it's not in the book.
I do have that. I would have to go back to my dissertation.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I'm just curious because I always say it goes both ways, but I wonder if there is a statistic that says more men or more women, or is it equal?
No, it was far more women were the victims. Men were the perpetrators. However, there were a few instances where, let's say, the woman might have been the one writing the injunction, and then it got to the point where she might have been the perpetrator of the homicide, or vice versa. And I do talk about that in the book, where it's not always the person who's writing the injunction who ends up being the person who commits the murder.
Interesting. Okay.
And there were several cases where both people maybe wrote injunctions.
Okay.
There were several cases with multiple injunctions. So overall, there were 108 petitions for injunction that I was able to analyze out of the 62 cases. Another very interesting statistic was out of both data sets is just around 50%, just under 50% for both data sets, where the intimate partner homicides were intimate partner homicide suicides.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is an extremely high percentage.
So when you say suicide, they just kill themselves or they kill their partner and then themselves?
Their intimate partner homicide suicide. So they would have killed their partner and then killed themselves during the same event.
Okay.
And from the research that I did prior to and during this study, the highest percentage that I found from any type of research into intimate partner homicide suicides prior to this was just around 35%. So it's a really high percent of intimate partner homicide suicides and should probably be looked into a little bit more by somebody else or...
No, yeah. It definitely could have easily have been me and not Greyson or both of us.
Yes, I think that this phenomenon is very misunderstood and not taken into consideration by courts at all and should really be taken seriously. Is a huge reason, again, why I wanted to do the study. And it frustrates me that this type of data is not necessarily being put in front of legislators, because the lethality risks are there, and it does tie to these nonviolent tactics of coercive control. These victims were going to court. They were saying, this is what I'm experiencing. They were saying, please give me protection. And some of them did get injunctions. Some of them lost their protection. Some of them had final injunctions in place at the time of the homicide.
Right.
They all have their different stories, and I think that's one reason why it drove me to want to tell their stories, because I feel the way the statistics came out, and then when you look at the stories, and the thing that I took the time to do in the book that I didn't have time to do in the dissertation was to really dig into the media stories that were available for some of the cases, and to see the court cases where the offenders survived, to follow those court cases all the way through to their conclusion. And some things that I found really interesting was that a lot of the cases didn't seem to be treated with the same type of seriousness or weight that, let's say, if they weren't intimate partners, perhaps they would have been provided if it was the murder of a stranger.
That's interesting.
If you put it into the same context as trying to go to court and get an injunction for protection to begin with, if, for instance, you brought up stalking earlier, if you're trying to get a stalking injunction and you were being stalked by a stranger, you would probably get that stalking injunction much easier if you would be being stalked by a stranger than you were if you were trying to be, or than you were if you were being stalked by an intimate partner. Because the judge is going to question more the intentions of the intimate partner who's stalking you, and perhaps say, he's just trying to communicate with you about this and this, and he's going to look at, maybe there was a reasonable explanation as to why he's texting you, or why he's coming to your door every time, or why he's in your parking lot, and all these different things, because you had a prior relationship, and so it's potentially more innocent. Where if it's a stranger, then it's a lot different. I don't know. It just seems like when I was doing these cases and seeing how on the other side, the sentencing, which doesn't seem to really be written about a lot, the offenders, instead of it being first-degree murder, they got charged with second-degree murder or manslaughter. And if it was a stranger, I don't believe that would have taken place. So it was just a little disheartening to end up finding that out as I was writing this book.
That's all very interesting. I know for me, I was told by judges and lawyers, oh, every couple reacts like that, or you can try to work it out. But what they don't understand is that you can't work anything out with someone who is completely irrational and obviously a sociopath.
And it goes to co-parenting too. A lot of these types of cases, it made me wonder, because I wrote this book before I really started working in Victim Safe Harbor. And there's a lot of telltale signs with clients that I work with or people that I talk to. A lot of people I have PTSD. I got PTSD really bad. You end up getting this hyperarousal and this fear because of everything that you're dealing with. And judges tend to view you in a certain light because of how you present in court. And as the case goes on, or even when you're sitting in court for an injunction for protection hearing, if you look like you're not presenting well for whatever reasons, because you're there in the courtroom with your abuser and your abuser is sitting there looking calm, cool, and collected, the judge may not necessarily be listening. Or I'm not saying they're not listening, but they're also, as they're taking in the evidence, listening to everything, they're going to be watching what you're doing. There's studies on this. And so when it comes to how everybody's viewed and what decisions are made by the civil and criminal court, even when it comes to the sentencing, I just have a hard time with, you said sociopath, but abusers can be really good at manipulating.
Oh, of course.
And
that's what they do best. They have two faces.
Which is a lot of times why people, whether it's heterosexual or it's why we fell in love with them and got involved with them to begin with, because they can be charming and they can be very endearing. And at some point in time, you end up realizing that things just aren't necessarily okay. But on the very intelligent, very successful, and in a hearing, in a deposition, all these different things, they can come across really well.
Absolutely. On paper, they're perfect and they're smart. They know what they're doing. They know when to put it on and put it off. So, yeah, I've experienced all of that firsthand as well.
And so that goes to that judicial training that you were talking about. And when you say the smartest attorneys, or the attorneys have to be smart, not only do the judges need to be trained, the attorneys need to be trained, advocates need to be trained. There's a lot of training.
Ad litem's.
Right.
Yes. I'm just curious, has Greyson's Law come up? Have you been able to cite it or use it or help?
Yes. We have clients ask us about it all the time.
Okay.
I've argued it in court.
Okay.
I've cited it in court. Sometimes I've trained on it, talked a lot about it. Sometimes it goes over well. Other times it falls flat. So
do you think it falls flat because the judge is just not educated, or maybe just the evidence in this case didn't apply?
That's a really good question. I think there is a little bit of resistance to what's new, and that...
So that comes to the training.
I think a lot of it comes to the training and needing to understand that whether these concepts, words, tactics, whatever it is, whether it's in the definition or not, because I agree with you, those buzzwords, the specific buzzwords are in the definition already. We can justify the tactic that are coercive control because they're in the definition already. So we've adjusted the petition for the injunction for domestic violence because it's a beautiful application now, and we're making it even better by not just having the check marks, we're adjusting it. We're going to make it even better by the way we're going to present it and have it even clearer for the person who's filling it out. That will make it even easier for the judge to read through and say, yes, we've got everything we need here.
Can you help people fill out the paperwork for an injunction?
Right now, and hopefully the funding will continue to flow, we don't usually get people who need to fill out injunctions, because if we do get anybody who calls us, we usually refer them to the places that have the funding. If somebody calls, we're like, have you gone here and here? Yes, yet. And if they say, I've been conflicted out, or I've already talked to them and they referred me to you, then we go from there. Ideally, we try to send people to all the free legal aid that is available to them first. So,
okay.
But my husband was an attorney as part of the IFP project for a couple years. So he's really familiar with doing all of that. He works with Victim Safe Harbor now.
Got it. Okay. And where can people get your book? Is it on Amazon? I'm going to put it in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's on Amazon, and you can also buy it directly off of Rutledge's website. Oftentimes they'll have discounts for it.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. And if you can just give the website address for national or for Victims Safe Harbor.
Sure. I usually don't get asked that, but it's just victimsafeharbor.org.
Okay. All right. I will put all of that in the show notes as well, so people can get in touch and contact when needed. And I thank you so much for chatting with us and sharing all this information, because I know there are a lot of people out there that are going to want to learn more about all of the research that you compiled and, of course, need some legal assistance.
Sure. Anytime. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course.
Thank you for doing your podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. It's pretty much the best way I can think I could help others is by providing a resource, like you said.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Donna.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If there's someone that you want to hear from on this podcast, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you would like to be a guest, please reach out at Allie@Greyson'sChoice.org. If you would like to continue to hear our podcast, please consider donating at Greyson'sChoice.org. Any amount helps to fund our mission to help protect our children.